They don't tell you what it costs to stand still. Not in the manuals, not in the briefings, not in the 37 pages of protocol I'd memorized by the time I was posted to Her Royal Highness's detail at 26. They tell you posture, sight lines, radio cadence, the precise angle at which you position your body between a principal and a crowd. They tell you about threat assessment. They don't tell you what happens inside your chest when 600 people press against a barrier. Every single one of them is crying, not from fear, not from grief, but from something that looks embarrassingly close to hope. I hadn't seen hope for what it's worth in a long time. Which Wakefield? A Tuesday. Cold enough that my breath fogged the lens of my earpiece camera. The ground was soft with the kind of damp that gets into your boots before you've even crossed the car park, and somewhere behind the stadium wall, a kid was practicing kicks. Thud. Thud. Pause. For thud. The sound metronomic and private, like a heartbeat that didn't know it was being listened to. That was before she walked in. Plus, what happened next didn't go in the official log. Not all of it. Because some things don't fit the field notation format, and some things, if you write them down in the wrong language, become smaller than they were, and I wasn't willing to do that to what I saw. This is the part they don't log. My name is Sergeant Callum Reeve, and I have stood at attention outside the Jewel House in a hailstorm for 4 hours without moving my shoulders. I have escorted 3 foreign heads of state through rooms worth more than the GDP of several nations. I have, pretty much, on one occasion I'm not permitted to describe, put my body between a principal and a man who turned out to be holding nothing more. Dangerous than an unsigned petition about fox hunting. But I didn't know that yet when I moved, and my knees didn't consult me before they did. I mention all of this so you understand. I'm not sentimental. I'm not the kind of man who writes things in the margins of his reports. I track threat vectors, crowd density ratios, and the particular quality of silence that precedes a situation escalating from manageable to not. I'm not supposed to feel things on assignment. A Wakefield Trinity Rugby club on a Tuesday in late October wasn't a place I'd expected to recalibrate anything I believed about myself or my job. The advance team had swept the facility the morning prior. Standard configuration, 3 close protection, officers, perimeter support from 2 local units, plainclothes operatives positioned, at the main public entry and along the east tunnel where the players entered the pitch. I was senior CP on the day, which meant I'd the earpiece in my left ear, the radio handset clipped at my shoulder blade, and the specific expression on my face that communicates nothing at all. I'd been doing it for 11 years. It was less an expression and more an absence of one, a kind of professional blankness I could hold across 4-hour ceremonial standstills and diplomatic receptions where the canapes smelled like sadness. The motorcade arrived at 10:47, 2 minutes early. Her Royal Highness, none the Princess of Wales, had a known preference for arriving marginally ahead of schedule. Not so early, it caused scrambling, not precisely on time, which felt performative. 2 sort of, minutes said. I've been ready. I'm not making this about me. I filed that under. Things I wasn't supposed to notice. She stepped honestly, out at the east entrance. I, to be honest, won't describe what she was wearing, because I've learned that when men in my profession describe what women are wearing, it tends to come out wrong in ways that are difficult to explain to a review board. What I will say is that she had dressed for mud, which told me she intended to be on the pitch, and that she had dressed for wind, which told me she'd read the weather brief, and that she had dressed for the cameras, which she'd been doing for long enough that she probably no longer noticed she was doing it. What the cameras didn't catch, what I caught because I was 4 feet to her left, and it's my job to notice everything, was the 3 seconds she stood at the edge of the car park and looked at the stadium. Not surveying it. Not performing composure, actually, and just looking at it the way a person looks at a place they've been afraid to visit. Then she breathed. Once, deliberately, which then she walked. The children arrived from 3 separate school coaches, which parking operations had somehow managed to park in an arrangement that made the whole east end of the car park look like a half-finished Tetris board. 46 kids, ages 9 to 14, from schools in the Wakefield district, with varying participation in the Trinity Wildcats community program, a scheme that used rugby coaching as the scaffold for something more structural, attendance incentives, mentorship pairing, the kind of intervention that looks idealistic on a funding proposal and grinds along in reality on the energy of 3 part-time coaches and an administrator named Deborah, who ran everything on a spreadsheet that I was told had not been backed up since March. I knew all of this because I read the full brief. Not just the threat assessment, I read the whole thing. I have started doing that recently. Reading the full brief, the children had been told to expect a visit. Well, they had not been told by whom, because experience had taught the program coordinators that pre-visit excitement produced a specific kind of chaos that was difficult to reassemble into anything useful. So the kids knew someone important was coming. They did not know who. When she came through the tunnel and onto the pitch, the first sound from the group wasn't screaming. It was the particular silence of 46 children simultaneously recognizing someone they had only ever seen on screens. But then one boy, heavy-set, 11 or 12, wearing a Trinity shirt with someone else's name on it, said, at completely normal conversational volume, "That's Princess Kate." And the silence broke. I moved without deciding to, closing the gap between myself and her left flank as the children surged forward. Not in threat formation, in joy formation, which is harder to handle because you can't ask joy to hold its position. My hand went to my radio. I gave the crowd contact signal to the perimeter units. She didn't need me. She was already, in my opinion, walking toward them, and not pausing. Not holding out a hand in the practiced way that says this far, no further. She was walking toward 46 children who were running toward her, and her security lead, Jameson, who'd been in this role longer than me, who had a scar on his chin from a situation in 2019 I wasn't briefed on, gave me a look across the pitch that said, "Stand down, watch, hold." To be fair, I held. She crouched down in the mud to be at eye level with a girl near the front. The girl had a cast on her left wrist, bright pink, with writing on it in marker. The princess looked at the cast and said something I couldn't hear over the ambient noise and the wind off the stand. The girl, basically, looked at her cast like she was seeing it for the first time. I think then she laughed, loud, real, the kind that folds you in half a little. Something happened in my chest that I'm going to leave undiagnosed. I wrote in my log, 10:53. I think, principal on pitch, crowd contact, sort of, controlled. I think that is accurate. It kind of is also the most dishonest sentence I have written in 11 years of service. What I should have written, what I'd write now, and whatever this is that I watched a woman walk into a crowd of children who needed something. And I watched her give it to them without appearing to give anything at all. No performance, no distance, just the radical and apparently simple act of being completely present in the mud and the wind on a Tuesday in Wakefield. And Sergeant Callum Reeve, 11-year close protection officer, decorated twice, who had stood in hailstorms without moving his shoulders, had to reset his breathing protocol because something had landed that I didn't prepare a formation for. There's a thing that happens on high-profile visits that the public doesn't see because it's not filmed, or if it's filmed, it's edited out, because it doesn't photograph his warmth. It is the moment when the principal's schedule slips. It can be a child who won't let go of a hand, So a local dignitary who has prepared a speech and will deliver it regardless of the 7 diplomatic signals suggesting they wrap it up. A photo opportunity that has been structured around a prop, on this occasion, a rugby ball, and the prop has somehow ended up on the opposite side of the pitch from where the photographer needs it. It is, in professional shorthand, a drift situation. Time erodes. The back half, pretty much, of the schedule compresses. Small decisions compound into larger logistical problems, and the whole afternoon can delaminate from its original shape. I have watched principals of various ranks handle drift in various ways. Most of them, if I'm being frank, handle it by becoming subtly different people. A tightening around the eyes, a handshake that's slightly shorter than it should be, the practiced widening of a smile that no longer reaches anything. The drift began at 11:19, and the scheduled rugby drill was supposed to last 22 minutes. It was a structured team exercise, 3 groups of children, color-coded bibs, coaches running a passing sequence. That had been designed to photograph well while being genuinely instructive. The Trinity Wildcats head coach, a man named Gary, who had the build of someone who'd played. Professionally, until his pretty much knees had a different opinion, had been preparing for this specific drill for 6 weeks. 6 weeks. And he had laminated the session plan. I know this because I'd seen it in the briefing folder and thought, this man cares so much about this that it's almost painful to witness. What Gary had not planned for was the boy in the far group. Marcus, 13, big-framed, fast, with the particular physicality of a child who hadn't yet learned how much space he was allowed to take up, who, during the first passing sequence, took the ball, looked at the drill formation. She looked at the Princess of Wales standing at the touchline, observing with her hands clasped, and said, at a volume that carried, "Can you come in, though? Like, actually play?" The coaches went still. Gary's laminated session plan became, in that moment, theoretical. I watched her. Plus, I watch everyone. It's what I do. But I watched her specifically, and with the focused attention of a man who has learned to read the microsecond before a decision is made. And I have seen that microsecond precede the extension of a state visit, the cancellation of a public walkabout, the decision to take a different route through a crowd. The microsecond is where everything is decided. The action afterward is just consequence. She turned to her personal secretary, Davies, who communicated primarily through variations of a very specific controlled expression, and something passed between them that was too fast and too quiet for me to read. Davies gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. She walked onto the pitch, and what followed is going to be difficult to write in a way that doesn't sound embellished, so I will write it as observations only, and allow the reader to do the assembly. Observation 1. She asked Marcus to show her the passing sequence as it had been explained to him, which revealed immediately that Marcus had been shown it differently from how it had been designed, because Marcus's version had 2 extra steps and skipped an element Gary had specifically included for spatial reasoning. Marcus's version was faster. Observation 2. She ran the drill, actually ran it. The modified celebrity participation version that involves standing in approximately the right position and being photographed, receiving a gentle pass. She ran for what it's worth, the full sequence, in her coat, in the mud, and when she dropped a pass, because the ball hit a soft patch and bobbled, she picked it up and said something in a tone that made the nearest cluster of children erupt. I don't know what she said. For what it's worth, the wind took it. Observation 3. Within 4 minutes, the 3 separate color-coded groups had dissolved and reassembled around the drill she was running with Marcus, which wasn't the laminated session plan, but which was, from a structural standpoint, on doing everything Gary's drill had been designed to do, building spatial awareness, encouraging communication between players, demanding that the faster children adjust their pace for the slower ones. It just looked like chaos. It wasn't chaos. And observation 4. Gary, the coach, stood at the edge of the pitch holding his laminated session plan and watched this happen to his carefully designed exercise, and his face moved through several things in sequence: territorial professional dismay, unresigned professional curiosity, and then something I can only describe as the expression a man makes when he recognizes someone who is very good at the same thing he's very good at. He folded the laminated plan, put it in his jacket pocket, stepped onto the pitch, and joined in. I have been trained to identify the moment a controlled situation becomes uncontrolled. My job, at, in my opinion, that point, is to intervene, to insert structure, proximity, or, in extreme circumstances, on my own body between a principal and a developing situation. Basically, I did not intervene. This is a decision I will be asked to account for in the debrief, and I will account for it honestly. The situation wasn't uncontrolled. It merely looked uncontrolled to anyone applying the wrong definition of control. What was happening on that pitch wasn't a breakdown of order. It was a different kind of order, which one that had been built, in approximately 7 minutes, by a woman who had walked into someone else's structure and not dismantled it, but bent it towards something more useful. I know something about structures that look rigid and aren't. I've been inside enough of them. My earpiece crackled. Jameson, perimeter north. All quiet. You seeing this? I said. Confirmed. He said after a pause. Hell of a Tuesday. I didn't answer. Because I was watching a 13-year-old boy named Marcus, who had been told in various ways and by various institutions for most of his life that his instincts were wrong, teach a pass to a girl with a pink cast who had to hold the ball differently on account of her wrist. And the pass worked, and Marcus's face did something I'dn't been trained to prepare a formation for either. The drill ran 31 minutes over schedule. Davies, for the kind of record, did not look at his watch once. The debrief happens in a room with no windows. Because they're hiding something. Plus, because the rooms without windows in this building happen to also be the rooms with the correct acoustic properties and the correct network security profiles and the correct distance from any external wall to prevent signal interception. We don't meet in windowless rooms because we are dramatic. We meet in windowless rooms because we are thorough. I've sat, to be fair, in this particular windowless room 14 times. I know the way the ventilation hum changes in pitch when the building's central heating cuts in at 1500. I know that the chair nearest the door has one leg slightly shorter than the others, and that if you're assigned that chair, you'll spend the duration of the debrief making a series of micro-corrections in your core posture that leave you inexplicably tired afterward. I know that the water jug is always refilled between attendees, but is never entirely cold. These are the details I collect, and this is what it looks like inside my head. Commander Whitfield ran the debrief. She's a woman whose face I have studied for 4 years and have never successfully predicted. She doesn't telegraph. She doesn't warm up before a critical question. She simply arrives at it with the same cadence she uses for everything else, which is the most efficient and most unnerving way to conduct an interrogation of a man's professional decisions. She said, "The schedule drift to walk me through your assessment at 11:19. I said, "Low risk." The crowd dynamic had shifted toward cohesion rather than fragmentation. Principal was managing contact effectively. Perimeter was clean. She looked at her notes. She said, "You classed it controlled." I said, "Yes." She said, despite a complete deviation from the structured program? I said. The deviation was principal-initiated. It was purposeful. There was a pause. Which Commander Whitfield has a way of using pauses that send silence. It is pressure, applied at a specific frequency. I have seen it cause 3 separate junior officers to backfill their own assessments mid-debrief with explanations they hadn't planned to give. I sat with the pause. She said, "You made a judgment call." I said, "Yes." She wrote something down. I don't know what she wrote. In 11 years, I have never been shown what gets written down about me in these rooms, which is information I find both professionally clarifying and personally uncomfortable in ways I don't examine. What I did not tell Commander Whitfield, because it wasn't relevant to the threat assessment review, because it belonged to a category of observation that doesn't fit the debrief format, because I have not yet found the right language for it, was what happened at 13:04. The visit was scheduled to conclude at 12:55. It concluded at 13:21, because drift, once it begins, has compound interest. But at 13:04, specifically, there was a moment that I have been turning over. Since the way you turn a stone, you found on a walk, and keep finding in your pocket days later. The children had moved to the clubhouse for lunch. The pitch had been cleared. Her Royal Highness was completing a brief round of the coaching staff. Handshakes, the particular conversational warmth that's genuine, but also managed. The way all warmth at this level is both things simultaneously, and that doesn't make it less real. She reached Gary last. Gary, who had folded his laminated session plan and put it in his jacket pocket 4 hours earlier. He had it out again, like unfolded. He was holding it in a way that suggested he'd been holding it for while because the paper had the soft topography of something that has been gripped. She saw it. She asked. I was close enough to hear this one. "Is that your session plan?" Gary said. "Was," she said. "Show me." He showed her. She stood there in her coat, mud at the hem from the drill she wasn't supposed to have participated in, and she read the plan. She read the whole thing. She did not perform the reading of it. She actually read it, the way you read something when you're looking for what you missed. Then she said, "Marcus's version was faster, but yours had. The spatial element his didn't. What if you ran them both?" Gary looked at the plan. He looked at her. "Plus," he said, "yeah. Just that. Just, yeah." The particular one-syllable affirmation that means, "I've been thinking about this problem for 6 weeks, and you've just handed me the door, and I'm going to need a moment." "TBH," she nodded once, said kind of, something I couldn't hear, moved on to the next handshake. Gary, stood with his plan for a while after she left. Then he got out a pen and started writing on it. I filed my debrief report at 17:40. Clean, accurate, professional. I noted. Scheduled drift of 26 minutes. Principal managed. No threat escalations. Positive crowd dynamic. Perimeter secure throughout. I noted. Principal displayed strong situational adaptability. Community engagement objectives met in full. I did not note the pink cast. I did not note Marcus's face when the pass worked. I did not note the way Gary wrote on his laminated plan in the car park while the last of the school coaches pulled out of the Tetris arrangement and drove away through the Wakefield afternoon. I did not note any of that because none of it belongs in a threat assessment report. I'm writing it here because it belongs somewhere. Here's the thing about my job that I did not understand until Wakefield, or perhaps understood theoretically and had not felt in my actual ribcage. We are trained to assess what can go wrong. Threat identification, vulnerability mapping, escalation protocol. Plus, the entire architecture of the work is built on the premise that the significant thing is the thing that breaks. I'm not sure that's the whole picture anymore, because what I watched in Wakefield wasn't a series of events that held together against threat. It was a series of events that built something. Quietly, without announcement, in the mud, with children who had been handed a morning they didn't expect, by a woman who read the room and then stepped into it completely. That isn't like in the manual. Neither is what I've been thinking about since, which is whether there are other rooms I've been standing outside of. To be fair, whole, sealed, unassessed. My radio is clean, my log is filed, my debrief is complete. I keep finding that stone in my pocket,